Okay. All right. So, well, so everyone knows that there's a lot of smart people out there in the world. Most people don't always share their story, their journey, what's called principle in life. So there are two kinds of people in the world. Those that go out there and dream and do and strive and accomplish. And there are those that don't dare to dream, don't dare to strive, don't dare to accomplish. So, but there's me in the middle, getting their story, their experiences, and sharing it with everyone else, so as to help them to dare to become remarkable. So that's why I got this podcast, you see, called Become Remarkable, to share with you, people from around the world, different stories and adventures and experiences. Today I have with me a character all the way from Cameroon, with an very interesting story to say the least. But enough edification. Samuel, please tell the world, who are you? What are you doing? Most importantly, why you're doing what you're doing? Please.
Oh, okay. As you said, my name's Samuel Agbor-Tabi. I lived in Cameroon when I was very young. Actually, I'm a cross-cultural person. My mom's from the States, my dad's from Cameroon, so I've always had a foot in both places, essentially. I guess, simply put, I'm a dreamer. I'm someone that takes concepts and makes them real. I could do that very easily in my head. I'm able to picture an idea, picture a concept. I'm the kind of person that drives down the road and knows that every single thing that you see, someone was most likely paid to put it there. Everything from the street lights to the grass that's been cut to, I mean, absolutely everything that you see going through a city. Somebody had a hand in putting it there, and someone was most likely paid to make it look the way it was. I mean, considering that in places like Cameroon, everything was forest, at one point. So I'm someone that sees ideas in just about every area. I'm also a person that people like to collaborate with on projects. My very first project was a pizza franchise, which we were creating in Rochester, New York. That pizza franchise lasted about 2 years and fizzled out. That was around the period where we had the economic crisis in the States, and a lot of funding that we were hoping to get dried up. And we had also not had any kind of nest egg set up because we were right out of college. And I mean, we went from being very happy about opening a business to 2 years later, my partner had his house, his car repossessed, was kicked out of his apartment and living in my basement. And I'm someone who, ever since, college, people have looked at me to start concepts. In that particular example, it was my partner who came up with the idea. I'm not someone that's particularly excited about food service. I wasn't, especially at that time, but I went along to, on this adventure with him, and I learned a lot. So I've known I wanted to be an entrepreneur since I was 14. And so that's kind of what fuels me. I feel like I've pigeonholed myself in this whole entrepreneurial category for a couple of reasons. One, I've been doing it for a long time. And as a result of that, if I was, for example, right out of college, I went to go work for a bank. I might be I might be someone that's pretty high up the food chain at the bank. I'd work my way up that ladder, and that's exactly where other people who decided to go the corporate route, that's exactly where they are at this point in time. Those who I graduated with, who have the same kind of ambitions that I do. I, on the other hand, picked the entrepreneurship route. And one thing about picking that, every time you have a business and it fails, you learn from it and you become better at entrepreneurship. And I've had my share of fails, throughout the years. And I feel like a lot of it would be wasted if I go back and decide to work for someone else. I've tried that in certain instances, and it's not really worked out the way I wanted to. And, I end up still always gravitating back to, things in the entrepreneurship world. Now, right now, what do I do? I do a number of things. I am the first vice president of the Mining Federation here in Cameroon, which was created in 2015. So I have a strong interest in mining and mining projects. But over the last, I would say since beginning of 2016, that industry has really been at a standstill for two reasons. World prices is one, and the second reason is Cameroon has just slowly become a place that's not really a mining destination. It's a place where people aren't coming to do mining projects anymore because there's been a lot of risk. And some people might even say there's been some corruption, which has slowed projects down. So yes, I'm still, the first vice president of the Mining Federation, but most of the activities in that sector are frozen, and so there's been little activity within the federation as well. I also do brand representations. I import products and sell them locally. And that's something that I'm also getting out of, yeah, for various reasons. I have trucks. I transport some building materials, cement and other things, and supply them to large projects. But now I am kind of clearing up my plate to focus on one or two activities surrounding agriculture and a fast food venture as well, which is something that I'm familiar with. And the whole reason behind doing the agriculture and the fast food restaurant at the same time in a place like Cameroon is it's really hard to source consistent items. I mean, if you're talking about lettuce, for example, in salads, it's really hard to work with growers and get consistent quality in the products and have consistency in the delivery times. So that's one of the reasons why I'm looking at managing both ends of the spectrum in this venture. Now, I know I kind of answered your questions in a different order from the way you asked, but I do what I do because I felt like this is always what I was supposed to do. My dad was a member of government here in Cameroon, but he was also an entrepreneur in many ways. He's not always been a member of government, but even when he wasn't, he did a lot in agriculture. He's done a lot in fisheries. He's done very large scale projects in those areas. He's done things in real estate as well, and I think I'm the second generation of that. I'm not someone that's involved in politics, at this stage of my life. But the entrepreneurial part or side of him is definitely alive in me. So
yeah, some interesting stuff there. Briefly, the mining aspect, just fascinated by that. What are you mining exactly?
Gold was what we were mining at one point in time. I switched out of that. I really focused on services to the mining industry. Transport, logistics, things of that nature for mining companies. That's more of what it's kind of that old adage where he who sells the shovels in a gold rush, ends up being So I mean, basically, I switched my approach. I was looking at mining projects when I first moved to Cameroon, but what interests me more in the mining sector are the services surrounding the mining industry.
Yeah, I call that the 1849 principle. where it's don't dig for the gold, sell the pickaxes and shovels that allow other people to dig for the gold.
To dig for the gold,
but also other complementary services. What do the miners also need? Bedding, clothing, food.
Yes.
There you go.
They do.
That's the way I see it. But But now, you also mentioned agriculture. And I was reading through the notes earlier. There was aquaponics and something about logistics and chickens, as I remember. But certainly the aquaponics, I'm fascinated in that because I looked into building one of those myself. The amount of space that's necessary and the tools and the equipment and logistics, and there's like different kinds where they fish and you feed them or just a running water cycle, and it's like, well, it looks very interesting. And a few years ago, I had the dream of starting a company that was dealing with aquaponics, but with hemp. And I imagine these massive glass towers, buildings that were just growing industrial hemp, ethanol and other things like that. But all these engineering ideas I had, but I thought I know nothing about it. But it's like, better not do it then. Then pivoted and tried other things. But I've looked aquaponics, fascinating subject, and I mentioned agriculture as well, because I think that if humans did not experience hunger, the world as we know it today would be completely different. I saw a stat flying around saying that everyone could live in the state of Texas with like a certain bed house, certain dimension and all the rest of the garden and all that, but we're spread all over the world. So that to me says that how much land the Earth minus Texas is essentially used for is essentially used for commercial or mining or non-residential stuff. And if all the farmland was like, oh, don't need it anymore, it's just no point in growing food, house prices would collapse, and it's like you can build houses everywhere, and it's a completely different world. And I think everything stems from a desire to satisfy the hunger. Everything we do, and ultimate motivation is for hunger. At least you look at the bills, for example, your accounts, transactions, and the majority of them will be for food related things. On the day-to-day kind of stuff, most of them will be food. You get rid of hunger, the entire game is flipped upside down. And I can go a little further into that, but agriculture is fascinating.
It is. I was actually just having a conversation about that yesterday with a good friend of mine. He's also an entrepreneur. And the way I see it, agriculture or industrial agriculture is really set up around the growth of cities. I mean, if you look at Lagos, for example, which has 20 million in population, about the size of the same population of the whole of Cameroon fits in Lagos itself. They definitely have a problem. I mean, once you start condensing people into such a concentrated environment, you can no longer be satisfied with consistent farming. I mean, basically, I can't have a garden to feed my family anymore for a couple of reasons. One, I don't have the space, and two, if I'm living in a city, most likely I have a job, and I don't have the time, to put into gardening and things like that. So it's really the whole idea of the world in a place like Cameroon where there's an abundance of food. It also stunts development, I believe, when everybody is no longer hungry. I think that's one of the reasons why you have a lot of advancements that happened, in Europe, because it's cold. I mean, if you don't make your food and have yourself, stocked up by winter, you die. And I mean that becomes that hunger drives people to advance the technology surrounding agriculture. Now, in Cameroon, you don't really have that. We have a ton of land that I could use, for farming. Even my family, we do have some land that I could use for farming. But some of the issues with traditional farming are, well, theft for one, management of such a big space. I mean, if you decide to do corn, for example, and really have a huge impact, I mean, you're talking hundreds of hectares of land. And it's really hard to manage. I mean, you could do plantains, and people will be stealing your plantains. I mean, it's such a headache. And I've talked to so many growers that they spend so much time just trying to manage that land. Aquaponics makes it so that on 2 hectares or 5 hectares, you know, I could put a fence around an aquaponics project and manage all that goes in and out of the project. It becomes kind of an industrial project. I mean, if I have a factory, it's the same concept, you know, and it's easier to manage. And so that's one of the reasons why I like it so much. I love the organic part to it. I love the yield. I mean, because the yield is amazing from other projects that I've seen, and that's pretty much what got me excited about that. And I always love new technologies, and it's not new, but you know, it seems to be expanding. I mean, there are a lot of people that are hearing about it, and more people are building projects and sharing it online, and there's a real conversation happening around aquaponics right now.
Yeah, so please then, when you said that if people aren't hungry, there's no drive for ambition. When you say that, what comes to mind straight away is the law of diminishing marginal utility. If you're not hungry, then there's no real incentive. Is that what you're kind of alluding to?
Yeah, I mean, if you know, if someone all of a sudden tells me that, hey, I'm going to fire you, but I know that, okay, I own my plot of land, I own where I live, you know, the taxes, I don't have to necessarily pay very high taxes, and all I have to do is walk outside and, you know, pick mangoes or whatever it is, you know, out of my backyard. I'm not too worried about that. But I mean, if you look at someone that lives in Lagos, for example, and they live in a small apartment and the rent is really high, their whole family lives there, you know, all of a sudden they have to relocate. I mean, it's a real shift in the way that they think. You know, whereas someone living in an area where natural resources are just abundant. I mean, the food is cheap because it grows everywhere. You know, someone like that you can enjoy your life easily. I mean, it's easier to enjoy your life and have less stress if, okay, for you know, you like drinking a pint every night. Okay, I could just go to the palm tree and get some palm oil from the palm tree and have it with friends, you know, around a campfire. I mean, it's just I'm agreeing with what it is that you're saying. I believe there is a correlation between the two.
All right, so please then, let's take it up a notch. Mm-hmm. In terms of aquaponics and what you're advocating, firstly, what's wrong with the world as it is now, the infrastructure, logistics, supply chain, things like that? And what are you doing, please, in Cameroon? And why?
What's wrong with the world?
Yeah.
That's a very big question. A
lot of big questions on this podcast.
Yeah. What's wrong with the world? I think the what's wrong with the world is usually surrounding the system of governance. The way I mean, every large society requires, you know, some form of government to handle things, and there's a lot of waste that happens within those systems. I think the systems that are more successful are those in which the middle class basically have a lot more power and influence. You know, in societies where you have an expanded middle class, they are able to stand up against injustice and other things better than places where everybody's just poor and hungry. In Cameroon, bribes are a big deal. I mean, corruption is a big deal, and part of that is because, you know, people don't have enough to support those who are around them. My company, Tabi Direct Investments, originally I did a lot of consulting, you know, for businesses who wanted to set up here in Cameroon. I've switched my model, and now I work on projects that I'm directly, you know, connected to, projects that I have equity in, and things of that nature. What am I doing to fix that general problem? I feel like the next step in the evolution, in Cameroon's evolution, is a growth of the middle class. Right now, the economy doesn't have a lot of industry connected to it. They're still cutting down a lot of trees. You don't have a ton of very large industrial agriculture projects, going on. Just to give you an example, one thing that they always say is 1% increase in agriculture in Cameroon is a % increase in GDP. I mean, it's that connected, basically. Cameroon's working on a very basic level. You do have some companies. You have Guinness here in Cameroon and other industries, but it's very small. I mean, it's not a very large industrial country, but there's so much potential. There's potential for industry. You have Nigeria next door, which can consume just about anything that Cameroon produces. They cut down so many trees, and most of those trees, is huge logs or large pieces of wood are just shipped out of the country without being transformed. Cocoa, Cameroon, I think, is the third or fourth largest cocoa producer, and most of that cocoa goes out in these bags, and they go to Europe, European factories, and everything like that, and just a fraction of it. I mean, I could just say nothing. I mean, it's such a small amount that is transformed here in Cameroon. So as an entrepreneur, I have a moral obligation to create jobs, basically. The things that I'm looking at or that I do are usually things that either create jobs or add money to the economy. The big thing is if you have 1,000 businesses that require consistent electricity and they have a lot of power outages, those voices are going to be heard, by government, because they're going to. I mean, if everyone's screaming, "Hey, you can't keep cutting our lights," on a weekly basis or whatever, the government will listen and actually put programs in to increase the electricity that's being produced in the country. So everything I do basically is to solve that issue. I do have some nonprofit projects that are in the pipeline as well. My dad was a traditional chief in his village, and he passed away a year and a half ago. And he did help bring a lot of development to the village. He brought different schools. He brought a nursing school to the village, and other projects he was able to make happen. I think my role now as an entrepreneur is to bring industry. We have. I'll just give you an example of a tiny project that we have. Our village has a lot of cocoa. I mean, a lot of cocoa comes out of our village, and one of the plots of land that we have has a very small waterfall that goes through it. And so one of the projects I was looking at was putting a very small micro hydro plant, which connects to a small transformation facility, so that at least some members of the community can have their cocoa processed, into cocoa powder or cocoa butter, and they could sell it at a higher price. I mean, that's basically the idea is to give back to the community in that way. So I think does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm very fascinated. I was going to say something about land, but I can't quite remember exactly what it was. But I'm also very curious because when I was reading the notes, you talked about chickens as well.
Yes.
And poultry of sorts. So could you elaborate on that, please?
Yes, absolutely. With this fast food project that I'm working on, chicken is a big part of that. So I'm actually creating the downside of what I'm going to buy, essentially. I mean, you have people you can buy chicken from here, but I'm trying to change the concept of fast food. If you set up a fast food in a developing country, it becomes a premium place to go to. The prices end up being more expensive. I mean, if you bring a McDonald's here, they're not going to have it. For example, if you look at it in dollars, people here might go out and spend maybe $2 or something like that for a meal at lunch, or $3, for a meal at lunch. And when they go out to higher scale restaurants, they might spend $10 or $11, $12 on a meal. But that's like a special, thing. It's not something they do on a daily basis. Now, what I want to do with my fast food is to create a system where you could get your food extremely quickly, but the prices are also reasonable, where the average, well, not really the average, but a lot more Cameroonians in the city can actually go and say, okay, I want a chicken meal, or things of that nature, and I want something that's different, because I'm really going to mirror it, have it look very much like the fast food restaurants that they have, in Europe or in the US.
So how the middle class though? How big the middle class in Cameroon? What's the population of Cameroon really?
The population of Cameroon is, let's see, I knew this answer.
Right.
I knew this answer. It's just skipping my mind, but it's not very big. I'll give you an example. The large cities like Yaoundé, you're looking at about 2 to 3 million. I mean, it's not very big. The other capital, Douala, is also about the same.
So,
you're looking at it's not very big. It's not very big. When you
10 to 20 million population.
Somewhere around there, yeah. I don't know what it is now, but I know it's right around. It's probably closer to 20, somewhere in the 18, I think, if I recall.
Yeah. Okay, because you mentioned a few interesting topics there. As a quick side note, when you mentioned a burgeoning middle class, right at the bar, what came to mind straight away was the Communist Manifesto. I read that a few years ago, 6 years ago, and I remember that Carl talked about how for communism to thrive, society needs to be stagnant and industry needs to be like going backwards or faltering or something. So I see a burgeoning middle class as a good thing for an economy, because I also know there's an interesting concept called the Solow Growth model, which talks about how as the population increases, supported by things like new ideas, information online, compounded by capital, which is infrastructure and investing and savings, very important savings, that can increase the productivity of a nation. And there's a few other factors like depreciation and amortization rates. But with population comes productivity. With productivity comes efficiency and a middle class. But to achieve governments as well, because in the growth model it talks about like things like property rights, patent laws, and reliable institutions.
Yes.
And when you work on these things, you get a growing economy, and also an interesting concept as well. In China, from 1975 to 2000, they had very cheap labor that was coming from the rural to the urban, but now they're experiencing what's called a Lewis turning point, where the cheap labor, the supply of cheap labor is diminishing, and there's a middle class, and they're not willing to essentially work for very low wages. But interesting contrast is India is experiencing, or about to start to experience, that demographics-wise, what China had in 1975.
Yes.
Kind of, sort of. So we might see in the next 30, 50 years, made in India will be synonymous to the feelings and emotions and response we get today when we hear made in China.
Yes.
You never know. So then I was just thinking that the title for this podcast later on, I was thinking Cameroon, the powerhouse of Africa, but then you said 20 million and all this, and it's like, oh, maybe not then. And a 1% growth, maybe not so much. But when you said Nigeria will consume anything, it's like, oh, maybe that's a powerhouse indeed, but maybe not the case. But the thing I wanted to also say, a quick comment to throw out there. You mentioned your company is called like Investment or Tabi Investments.
Yes.
I saw a quick scene, very, very briefly, very rarely, on The Sopranos. Never seen the show, barely know of it. And there's a quote in there Tony Soprano, I guess, the father.
Yeah.
He's giving his sort of a guy the tour of this this neighborhood, and he says to his son, "Buy land because," and I quote, "God ain't making any more of it."
Yeah,
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on economics and the macro and the micro, Cameroon, Africa? What do you think? Global trade and beyond.
I think right now in Cameroon, the biggest thing that's needed are jobs. Like I said, Cameroon right now is going through a lot of struggles. The economic downturn worldwide has actually hit Cameroon pretty hard recently. Let me give you some background. Right now, Cameroon it hosted the Women's African Nations Cup. And next year it's supposed to, in 2019, it's supposed to host the Men's African Nations Cup here in Cameroon. It has a lot of very aggressive projects, in terms of, road construction and things like that. It has very aggressive goals. But what's happening right now in Cameroon, you have the northern part of Cameroon, the extreme north, which is being affected by Nigeria's Boko Haram issue, where these people are running in, raiding and shooting people, in the extreme north part of the country. So that's an issue in the north, and it's drawing a lot of state funds, towards to try and fix that problem. In the meantime, in the south and northwest part of Cameroon, which are Anglophone parts of Cameroon, if you understand Cameroon history, Cameroon used to be a German colony. After the World Wars, it was split between England and France. And the Anglophone part of Cameroon was given the option to join with Nigeria, join with the French Cameroon, and they chose to join with French Cameroon. And so you have a very different system. You have a Commonwealth system in the Anglophone part of Cameroon, and a very French, civil system in the other part, the Francophone part of Cameroon. And recently, there's been a lot of tension in the south and northwest part of Cameroon, and it's blown up into some kind of, I don't know whether you'd call it a resistance movement, but there are people that are unhappy. And I think a lot of that unhappiness, and even the problems with Boko Haram, stems to people not having a lot of jobs. People wouldn't be pushed towards these kinds of movements if they had jobs, if they had that kind of security, if they were able to educate their kids, send them to school, do all those kinds of things. Groups like that would not interest the general population. One of the things, this is going more into the political side, countries like Cameroon that are in this stage of development, their politics are not very complicated. You don't have political groups that are advocating like in the U.S. You have the Republicans, which advocate small government, the Democrats, which advocate a little bit larger government. Republicans that are anti-abortion, Republicans that are pro-gun, Democrat. I mean, the issues are a little more finite in developed countries, and they can't be in underdeveloped countries. It only happens when that middle class actually starts to grow. Once you have a middle class, basically, then they start saying that no, I want my butter to not come from whatever kind of, I don't like GMOs, I don't like this. I mean, they could be more specific about what they like and don't like and focus on that. And
standards rise and they get first world problems. Exactly.
Cameroon is I would say at the cusp, and it's been at the cusp for quite a while. There's so much potential. Yes, it has a small population, but it has a very educated population as well, and it can easily become an industrial country because you know what? Europe is still ready to buy a lot of goods from Cameroon. I mean, they love the wood that comes out of here. Fender, the guitar company in the U.S., the necks of their guitars are sourced right here in Cameroon. I mean, the company that does it is, you know, about a 15-minute drive from my house, and they are actually the ones that you know, cut the ebony trees and create the necks of the guitars, or the black keys on certain pianos, you know, in the music industry. There are a lot of things that that Cameroon can provide to the rest of the world. It comes down to two things. Energy. Cameroon is in Africa. It is the second in terms of hydro energy potential. It's the second in the whole of Africa, but it's so behind in terms of you know, what the country needs and what we actually have. There's a huge you know, disparity. I think that's the word. Yeah.
Underdeveloped infrastructure.
Exactly.
Remind me, please go on, please.
Go ahead.
Remind me, please. Cameroon, is it landlocked? I'm trying to picture where. Okay, right.
Yeah,
so that's very helpful then. Very helpful. For
it is extremely strategic because you have other countries which are landlocked that use Cameroon's ports to ship out a lot of goods. I mean, you have Chad, you have, you know, other countries that are within the you know, they're building. There's one port in the economic capital. They're building another one, which is actually started working in a place called Kribi, which is not too far from Equatorial Guinea and things like that. So people that don't want to use that port can also ship things up to the Kribi port. And, you know, in the long term, they also wanted to develop a Limbe port, which Nigeria would actually use quite a bit to be able to ship out their goods as well. So it's Cameroon's a very strategic country, and, you know, it's surrounded by very large populations. It has educated people, which a lot of times are the ones that go to these surrounding countries to do projects, everything from telecom projects. You have a lot of Cameroonians that work, you know, in those countries for telecom and anything to do with IT. You even have a lot of these countries that send their public officials to Cameroon to educate themselves on governance and things like that. I mean, it's a place where there's an educational system that is, in some cases, superior to some of those other countries around us. But I don't know. I'm saying that, but, you know, nothing is stagnant. A lot of those countries are improving in terms of education, and you know, what they're providing is education, and so it's never really like a stagnant thing. They're always, you never really know where Cameroon stands. But till date, you know, you still have a lot of countries that come into Cameroon to study, and yeah.
Yeah, I'm very curious then, because you mentioned other nations. What's the geopolitics? What's the political situation like in Cameroon? The stability, because Zimbabwe recently, no more Mugabe, and yeah. was it Eritrea 6 months ago? That a country that's like a tiny little slit. He had a presidential election, and the incumbent president was like rejected, but he stayed in power. Then he ran away to the neighboring country, which was like
yes.
Ivory Coast or something. I'm not sure, but it's like further south from where you are.
Yes.
And I remember hearing something about some election in Chad or in the Horn of Africa or somewhere where there's election, but it's been postponed for the end of the year or something, or in January. So it seems to be a lot of stuff happening. Mugabe, for one, you know, I will run Zimbabwe for 1 billion years if God permits.
Yes.
So,
yes.
You know, and Zimbabwe inflation in 2008. So, you know, there's been some history there. What's the situation like? You know, what do you think? What do you feel?
The sub-region is unique. It's called the CEMAC zone. I don't know what the acronym actually means, but it represents the Central African zone. Those countries, we all share a currency, and that currency is pegged to the French franc, same as it is in countries like Senegal, Mali, and everything like that. A lot of ex-colonies of France are still very much connected, to that. So that has a huge influence on the politics that happen in Cameroon and the surrounding countries. There were a few monopolies, for example, until last year. I think it was last year or the year before. There was a monopoly in the cement industry, and the company that had that was a French company. If you look at our port system, Bolloré had signed these very long-term agreements with most of Francophone Africa. And so they control the ports, they manage the ports. Recently, the Gabonese president wanted to give the port to a different country, and there was this huge, uproar where, Bolloré was, trying to take the countries to court and everything like that. This area is very influenced by France and their politics, I guess you could say, vis-a-vis this part of the world. Now, very recently, you've had, thanks to the Chinese, I mean, a lot of people would say what they want about them, but they actually made other people, other than, France and a few other nations, interested in Africa. Because if the Chinese didn't start investing heavily, I don't think many of these other countries would be so anxious to get into Africa and see how they could, take advantage of business here. Because before that, this area was dominated by, NGOs and, whatever the IMF said was for Cameroon to get the funding that they need, they had to compromise a lot. Now, in Africa as a whole, you see more and more resistance to that philosophy. You see that in Gabon. You see that in Senegal. Recently, the French president was in, I think it was Mali, at a university, and you had students asking direct questions about, French relationships with the rest of Africa. So it's a time where there are subtle changes happening. And I think Cameroon's trying to adjust to that. I think a lot of the countries in the sub-region are trying to adjust to that. And there's a growing concern, because Cameroon has been known as a very stable country up until recently, with the issues with Boko Haram, with the issues that are happening in the north and the southwest. I mean, these were things that people would not even imagine, them happening right now in Cameroon. The president has been president here in Cameroon for a while, and so a lot of people attribute it to that. But he has also done a lot to keep a certain level of stability here in the country. So when you ask about the geopolitics and everything like that, I think there's some outside forces that are trying to push for regime change, and using social media and things like that. There are a lot of people. They could be Cameroonians, which are outside of the country. They could be other states, which have an interest in Cameroon being unappealing to certain other countries. Because honestly, if you're going through a lot of trouble, you're going to come and you're going to beg and say, hey, we need help with this. And, they'll be more than happy to help you. But, hey, these are the conditions. And, those conditions are not always what you read about in the papers. And so right now, politically, a lot of the places, the old French colonies are starting to question the status quo that you see, and that includes Cameroon to a certain extent. There are certain monopolies that are being broken up. There's certain companies that are, irritated because they're not winning as many contracts as they used to. So in Central Africa, you have a number of heads of states that have been around for a long time. But you'd be surprised how many people actually support them within the country. But there is this wave, just like there was a wave in Northern Africa, to change out, the leaders that have been, there for quite a while. I think you're starting to see that wave with Mugabe, and I don't think Mugabe is going to be necessarily the last person that gives up power in the near future. I think you'll see more of that happening in Africa. The question is whether the movement is going to have a long-lasting effect, because in Northern Africa, in some countries, it really hasn't. Some countries have actually gotten even worse, than they were at some point. Look at Libya and all the problems that regime change has caused. So it's at a very sensitive period in its development, because once there's a regime change, there's usually a fight for power. And in Africa, that fight for power is not, it's not a fight of words. Sometimes it's a fight of I mean, people take action, and a lot of people get hurt. So we just hope that when the transition does happen, in not just in Cameroon, because if a transition happens in a country near Cameroon, that also affects Cameroon. You have refugees that pour into the country. You have people that have seen a lot of insecurity. For example, there's the Anti-Balaka, and there are a few terrorist groups in the eastern region of Cameroon that come in from surrounding countries. I mean, these are people that have seen war for so long, that will come into Cameroon in the very heavy gold-rich areas and rob people and do all those kinds of things. What happens around a country affects a country, especially when the borders are very porous, and groups can just walk in and out. I mean, any way that they can. So I'm hoping that the transitions that happen in this region are thought out, are organized, and it doesn't become one of those chaotic situations where war affects the whole sub-region.
Yeah, see, chaos. What, domino? Africa's a domino. Wait, one of them just falls, and then all the rest will into chaos.
Yes, very much so.
Very quickly, I'm very curious. What was the area where Cameroon is called, where they have the currency pegged by the French franc? Although I'm interested in that as well because it's euro. But what was the area called? The economic area?
They call it the CEMAC zone. CEMAC. CEMAC.
CEMEC.
Yeah, CEMAC. Excuse me. There are two zones. There's the Central African zone, and there's a zone in West Africa. Which so there are actually two currencies. If you're looking it up, the Cameroon currency is actually the XAF, and the other currency is XOF. But they have the same value basically. I mean, when you're comparing it to the euro. Well, I said the French franc, but yes, it's the euro now. But since they had that arrangement with France, it just kind of flowed into the euro once France adopted the euro as a currency.
Well, that in of itself is fascinating, because when you say euro, that's you're talking not just French and not just France. You're talking loads of other countries in Europe that can indirectly affect Cameroon's economics.
Yes.
Interesting.
But Cameroon, France has the largest influence because, according to because of this relationship, this financial relationship, a lot of Cameroon's money actually has to be kept in France. The printing of Cameroon money happens in France.
Interesting.
Yeah, the French print our money, and they also keep a lot of our money within their bank. So that's part of the relationship that Cameroon has with France and many other countries for that matter.
Interesting. But Samuel, as we slowly wind down this podcast, what is it you're working on now, and what's next for you?
Well, I'm working on this project. I have the land to do it, and I have the experience in fast food. And over the last year, I've had a number of people approach me to work with them on fast food projects. They haven't really developed, but I said, why not just do one myself? So basically, I'm shifting away. As I explained, I was doing a lot in the building material industry recently. I still have my trucks doing that now, but I'm moving away from that because of the economic situation that's happening right now. There's a lot of risk in that, because the first thing that people stop doing when the economy goes down is they stop building. They don't build as much as they used to. And so the market becomes a lot more competitive, in terms of people who are trying to supply building materials, not just in terms of the fact that fewer people are building during a down market, but the prices also for the goods that you're supplying have to be reduced. So your margins are not as interesting. So I wanted to work on something that was a little less, that's less affected by, simple economic up and downs. And so that's what I'm working on. That's going to be my focus in the coming year. What direction am I wanting to go? I know that the next step is industry. It really is. It's taking those agricultural products that Cameroon produces, or wood, or whatever it is, and transforming it into something and selling it. I mean, people like me who've been educated, in the States, and spent a lot of time there, and others who've been educated in England or in France, need to actually do that. It's a duty, for us to come back and say, hey, you know what? I saw this opportunity. They need this. We make it. So why don't we just, package it well here and sell it to people in those countries? And so that's the direction that I'm going in. I'm starting in food service, but it's not just like, for example, the agricultural products are not just for my fast food chains. They're also, they could be shipped to other cities to be sold in supermarkets, etc. And I want to expand that. For example, a lot of strawberries, if you can imagine, are still shipped in from France. They have some small growers here, but it doesn't make sense that someone would ship strawberries in from France, and that's something that could easily be done in an aquaponics setting. And so I'd like to replace that. Why import all these things when so many of them could be produced locally, at less cost? If I was at one point, I still have product left over, but I was, working in the wine and liquor business as well. And in Cameroon, the import tax for a liquor is and a wine is somewhere around 80 something percent. 80% is the custom duty. Why import something? So if I buy something in your neighborhood and I buy it for, I don't know, 5 quid or 10 quid, and I bring it here, I'm basically doubling it. The cost is automatically doubled once it gets off the boat. People are still buying in huge amounts. Why don't people bottle here in Cameroon? To avoid some of those taxes. So I'm looking at ways, and opportunities that make it so that we're not just importing things in from other countries. We're actually producing locally. So that's kind of the focus. That's my focus at the moment.
That kind of sounds like import arbitrage in a way.
Yeah, in a way.
Interesting.
But it's not just that. It's also there's so much that can be produced. Honestly, Nestle is very strong here in Cameroon. There was Nestle has a very questionable history in how they treat competition in other countries. And at one point there was a company that was practically destroyed by some of their policies here in Cameroon. And they've never been compensated for stuff like that. And it's unfortunate because this was a local company that was making canned milk in a can and distributing it. But businesses like that need to be encouraged. It's not the Cameroonians need to take advantage. They really need to hold that by the horns, because no one from outside is going to come in. No country is going to come in and help you develop your manufacturing. Oh, look at the UK, for example. At this point, with Brexit, they're looking for opportunities to be able to sell goods that are manufactured in the UK. I mean, they are aggressively looking. I mean, they have very aggressive strategies, which is good. I mean, it's good to be able to increase trade. But the UK is not going to come to Cameroon and say, "Hey, we'd like to help you guys, make what we can make and send to you." I mean, it just strategically, it just doesn't make sense. So it's really up to the people that are here to say, "Okay, we can do this. Let's do it. Let's import the other things that we can't produce here, but for certain agricultural products, they should be done locally. The transformation should be done. Potato chips." We Lay's potato chips, man, we could grow potatoes like crazy here. Why don't we have more people producing, potato chips in Cameroon, for example?
I'll leave it with this thought.
Okay.
Economics is major, so you should major in economics.
Yes.
So,
agreed.
Please, Samuel, what is the best way for the audience to get in touch with you?
The best way is going to be through my website. That's one way to reach me, or my email address. Should I just
Wait, both? Could you say them, and we'll have them in the show notes below?
Yes. The website is www.tabidirectinvestments.com. And you could just email if you have any questions, info@tabidirectinvestments.com. That's probably the easiest way to reach me.
That sounds cool. Cool. So, Samuel, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's really fascinating.
Thank you. Yes.
And ladies and gentlemen at home, if you haven't already, subscribe, follow, because this channel is all about becoming remarkable. Wisdom, practicality, and resourcefulness. That's what is needed in life. And you can't get that if you have a very self-contained lifestyle, taking ideas left, right, and centre, learning ideas. This Semek zone thing, I'm going to look into that. And Cameroon, certainly I'm going to look on Google Maps, whereabouts it is, and population. Sounds fascinating stuff. A fledgling powerhouse of Africa. Being curious. Let's explore a little bit.
Yes.
But remember, subscribe, because this life is all about doing remarkable things. Life is all about opportunity. So go out there today and do something remarkable, because that is what it's all about. How cool is that? It's very cool, isn't it, Sam?
It is. It is. Absolutely.